The morning of Richard Northwood's funeral brought rain that seemed fitting for the occasion. Dark clouds hung over the cemetery as family members huddled under black umbrellas, watching the ornate mahogany casket being lowered into the ground. Emily Northwood, the eldest of Richard's 3 children, stood with perfect posture despite the grief weighing on her shoulders. At 42, she had inherited her father's sharp features and steely determination, qualities that had served her well as a corporate attorney. Next to her stood Michael, her younger brother by 3 years, shifting uncomfortably in a suit that looked like it had been purchased specifically for this event. His reddened eyes betrayed the tough exterior he'd maintained throughout the service. Sarah, the youngest at 35, quietly sobbed between them, her slender fingers clutching a handkerchief that had belonged to their mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the minister intoned, his words partially swallowed by the patter of rain on umbrella fabric. Emily placed a steadying hand on Sarah's shoulder. The 3 siblings hadn't been in the same place for nearly 2 years, not since their last Christmas gathering had ended in another explosive argument between Michael and their father. Now Richard was gone, felled by a sudden heart attack at 72, leaving behind the sprawling Northwood estate and the family business he had built from nothing. After the ceremony, they retreated to the family home, a stately colonial in Hartford, Connecticut, where Richard's attorney waited to read the will. The house felt emptier now, despite the gathering of distant relatives and business associates picking at catered food in the dining room. "Shall we proceed?" Walter Jenkins, the family attorney for over 30 years, gestured toward Richard's study. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an air of authority that had always intimidated the Northwood children, even now as adults. The study was just as Richard had left it. Leather-bound books lining mahogany shelves, the faint smell of pipe tobacco lingering in the air, and the large oak desk dominating the room. Emily, Michael, and Sarah took seats on the leather sofa across from Jenkins, who settled into Richard's chair with a thick folder before him. "Before I begin," Jenkins said, adjusting his glasses, "your father wanted me to tell you that he loved you all very much, despite his difficulty in expressing it." Michael scoffed quietly, earning a sharp look from Emily. Jenkins cleared his throat. "I'll start with the straightforward matters. The Northwood Group will continue under the board's direction, with Emily retaining her position as legal counsel. The family home and its contents are to be divided equally among the 3 of you, though your father hoped you might consider keeping it in the family rather than selling." Sarah nodded, dabbing at her eyes. The house held too many memories to simply put on the market. As for Richard's personal assets and investments, the distribution is as follows. Emily will receive 30%, Sarah will receive 30%, Michael will receive 30%, and the remaining 10% will go to James Carroll. There was a moment of silence as the name hung in the air. "Who the hell is James Carroll?" Michael finally asked, leaning forward. Jenkins looked uncomfortable for the first time. "James Carroll is your half-brother." The room seemed to tilt. Emily's normally composed face slackened with shock. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Michael shot to his feet. "That's impossible," Emily said, her lawyer's mind already searching for legal grounds to contest the will. Jenkins slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a young man, perhaps in his early 30s, with unmistakable Northwood features, the same straight nose and determined jawline that Richard had passed to Emily. "Your father had a relationship before his marriage to your mother," Jenkins explained, "with a woman named Diane Carroll. James was born from that relationship, and he kept this secret our entire lives." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Why now?" Michael demanded, pacing the study. "Why would he do this to us now?" Jenkins adjusted his glasses again. Richard reconnected with James about 3 years ago. They had been meeting regularly since then. He regretted not being part of his son's life and wanted to make amends. Emily's mind raced through the timeline. 3 years ago, right around when her father had started becoming more withdrawn, more private about his personal affairs. She had attributed it to aging, to grief over their mother's passing. "Never this." "Does he know about us?" she asked. "Yes," Jenkins confirmed. Richard told him everything. In fact, he checked his watch. "James should be arriving shortly. Your father wanted you all to meet today." Michael slammed his hand on the desk. "You're telling me that Dad invited this stranger to his funeral? To barge in on our family's grief?" "Michael," Sarah said softly, attempting to calm her brother. No, Sarah, this is unbelievable. Dad spent my entire life criticizing every choice I made. And meanwhile, he had this whole other secret family. It wasn't a family, Jenkins clarified. Just James and his mother. And Richard provided financial support, though from a distance. The doorbell rang, the sound echoing through the house. The three siblings froze. That would be him, Jenkins said, standing. I'll go. I'll do it, Emily said, surprising everyone, including herself. She needed a moment to compose herself, to prepare for whatever was waiting on the other side of that door. She walked through the house, past the murmuring guests, and to the front door. Taking a deep breath, she opened it to find a man who could have been a younger version of her father standing on the porch, his shoulders hunched against the rain. He looked nervous, clutching a small bunch of white lilies, her father's favorite flowers, a detail that sent an unexpected pang through her chest. You must be Emily, he said, his voice carrying the same baritone quality as Richard's. I'm James. I'm sorry for your loss. Emily studied him, searching for deceit or ulterior motives, but found only genuine grief and apprehension. She stepped aside to let him in, her mind still reeling from the revelation that had just upended her family's world. Behind them, Michael appeared in the hallway, his face a storm of emotions. Sarah followed, curious and tearful. For a moment, the four children of Richard Northwood stood in an awkward square, connected by blood but separated by secrets and time. None of them knew it yet, but this moment marked the beginning of a journey that would force them to confront not just their father's secrets, but their own buried truths as well. The Northwood family foundation had cracked, and what would emerge from those fissures remained to be seen. The days following the funeral blurred together in a haze of awkward conversations and sleepless nights. Emily had taken a 2-week leave from her law firm, something she hadn't done in years, to handle her father's affairs. She found herself alone in his study late one evening, a glass of his favorite bourbon in hand, surrounded by boxes of personal documents she'd begun sorting through. The house was quiet. Sarah had gone back to her apartment in Boston, promising to return on the weekend. Michael had disappeared after a heated argument with Emily about James, likely retreating to his friend's cabin in the Berkshires where he always went to clear his head. And James had left after that first uncomfortable meeting, leaving his contact information with a gentle offer to help however he could. Emily took a sip of bourbon, wincing at the burn, and opened another folder. Inside was a stack of birthday cards, homemade ones with childish handwriting and drawings. They were all addressed to Dad and signed James. The earliest was dated 30 years ago. He kept them, she whispered to the empty room. All this time, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her travel bag still by her feet. I couldn't sleep in Boston, Sarah explained, coming in and picking up one of the cards. What are these? Birthday cards from James to Dad. Emily handed her sister the earliest one. Look at the date. Sarah examined it, her eyes widening. That's the year I was born. Exactly. Dad was getting these while we were growing up, while he was taking us to soccer practice and dance recitals. Emily couldn't keep the edge from her voice. He had this whole other life we knew nothing about. Sarah sat down across from Emily, tucking her legs underneath her like she used to do as a child. Have you called him? James, I mean. No. Have you? Sarah nodded, looking slightly guilty. Yesterday. We met for coffee. Emily raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He's nice, Em. He's a teacher, middle school English. He has a son, too. A little boy named Richard. Sarah smiled sadly. Dad knew about him. There are pictures of them together in James's apartment. The thought of her father spending time with a grandson she didn't know existed sent a wave of betrayal through Emily. What else did you find out? His mother died when he was 25. Cancer. Apparently, that's when Dad started sending him money directly instead of through her. But they didn't actually meet in person until 3 years ago. Sarah hesitated. He said Dad reached out after getting some health scare. It made him reevaluate things. Emily thought back to the minor stroke her father had suffered 3 years ago. The doctors had called it a warning sign. They'd all encouraged him to slow down, to delegate more at the company. Instead, he'd apparently started building a relationship with his secret son. What about his mother? Diane, did he tell you anything about her? Sarah shook her head. Not much. Just that she never spoke badly of Dad, even though he wasn't around. A car door slammed outside, followed by heavy footsteps on the porch. Moments later, Michael appeared in the doorway, looking tired and unshaven. "Family meeting?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd been drinking. "Just going through Dad's things," Emily replied, watching her brother carefully. Michael's relationship with alcohol had been problematic in the past. He crossed to the desk and poured himself a generous amount of bourbon. "Find anything interesting? Maybe more secret siblings? A hidden treasure map?" "Mike," Sarah warned softly. He waved her concern away, dropping into a chair. "Sorry, defense mechanism." He noticed the birthday cards spread across the desk. "What are these?" Emily explained, watching Michael's expression darken as she spoke. "So he was father of the year to this other kid while telling me I was wasting my potential?" Michael drained his glass in one go. "Perfect. I don't think it was like that," Sarah countered. "From what James said, Dad wasn't really present in his life either, until recently." "Oh, you've been talking to him now." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Getting cozy with our replacement brother?" "He's not a replacement, Mike," Emily cut in. "And yes, Sarah met with him. I think we all should." Michael laughed bitterly. "Why? So we can all pretend to be one big happy family?" "Dad made his choice. He chose to keep this guy separate from us our entire lives. And now he's asking us to fix his mistake," Emily said firmly. "The question is, are we going to be as stubborn as him, or are we going to be better?" Michael stared at her, then at the cards. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, set it up, but I'm not promising to play nice." The meeting happened 2 days later at a neutral location, a private room at the Mill, a restaurant on the outskirts of Hartford. James arrived first, followed by Emily, then Sarah with a reluctant Michael in tow. The conversation started stiffly, with James doing most of the talking. He told them about growing up in Springfield, just an hour away from Hartford. How his mother had worked as a nurse at the hospital where Richard had been treated after a car accident in his 30s. How they had fallen in love during his recovery, but Richard had already been engaged to the Northwoods' mother. "My mom knew the situation," James explained, turning his coffee cup nervously in his hands. "She never expected him to leave your mother for her. But then I came along, and it complicated things." "How did he find out about you?" Emily asked. "Mom told him right away. He never denied I was his. He set up a trust fund for me, paid for my education. But we had rules. No direct contact. No disrupting his real family." Michael scoffed. "Sounds like Dad. He sent birthday cards, Christmas gifts. Sometimes he'd show up at my baseball games, sit in the back. Mom would point him out." James smiled faintly. "It wasn't ideal, but I knew he cared in his own way." "When did that change?" Sarah asked gently. "After his stroke. He called me out of the blue, said he wanted to meet. We started having lunch every few weeks. Then he met Tommy, my son." James pulled out his phone and showed them a picture of a smiling boy, about 8 years old, with the unmistakable Northwood eyes. Dad doted on him. Emily felt a complicated twist of emotions. Anger at her father for the deception, jealousy that this stranger had gotten parts of Richard that they hadn't in recent years, but also sympathy for James, who clearly had his own complex feelings about their shared father. "Why did he keep you a secret from us?" Michael asked bluntly. "Even after Mom died, he could have told us." James looked uncomfortable. "He said he was afraid of how you'd react, that he'd already damaged his relationship with you all in different ways, and this might be the final straw." He looked at Michael. "Especially with you." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. "Did he tell you about us?" Emily asked. "What we were like growing up." James nodded. "He was proud of all of you." "Emily, he kept newspaper clippings of your big cases." "Michael, he followed your band online. He had all your music." "And Sarah, he bragged about your work with the school district constantly." The revelation stunned them into silence. Their father had never been effusive with praise. To hear that he had spoken proudly of them to someone else was both heartwarming and painful. "I never wanted to disrupt your family," James continued. "When Dad said he was putting me in his will, I told him not to. But he insisted. He said it was time everyone knew the truth." "Typical Dad," Michael muttered, "making decisions for everyone else." "I'll understand if you want nothing to do with me," James said quietly. "I'd be disappointed, but I'd respect it. Tommy and I have been fine on our own." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'd like to meet my nephew." James smiled gratefully. Emily studied him, still processing everything. There was sincerity in his eyes that was hard to dismiss. I think we all need time. This is a lot to take in. Michael remained silent, staring out the window. As they prepared to leave, James handed each of them an envelope. Dad gave these to me about a month ago. He asked me to give them to you if anything happened to him. I think he knew his time was running short. Emily took her envelope, feeling the weight of it in her hand. Inside would be her father's final words to her, words he couldn't bring himself to say in person. She wasn't sure if she was ready to hear them. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, the three siblings watched James drive away. The revelation of his existence had created a fault line in their family, but whether it would cause everything to crumble or lead to a new foundation remained to be seen. Emily sat alone in her apartment, the unopened envelope from her father resting on the coffee table before her. For 3 days, it had traveled with her, from her bag to her nightstand to her desk at work and back again. But she hadn't found the courage to open it. Whatever was inside would be the last communication she would ever have with her father, and that finality terrified her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Open mine. Call me when you've read yours." Emily sighed. Of course, Sarah had already opened hers. The youngest Northwood had always been the most emotionally brave of the three. Emily, for all her courtroom confidence, found herself paralyzed by the prospect of confronting her father's last words. She poured herself a glass of red wine, took a deep breath, and carefully broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on Richard's personal stationery. "My dearest Emily." It began, his bold handwriting as commanding on paper as his voice had been in life. "If you're reading this, I've finally run out of time to make things right in person. A coward's way out, perhaps, but we Northwoods have never been particularly skilled in matters of the heart." Emily smiled despite herself. That much was true. "I've always been prouder of you than I could express. Your determination, your brilliance, your unwavering sense of justice. These are qualities I wish I had possessed in greater measure. But I fear I've done you a disservice in shaping you too much in my image. You've learned to bury your feelings beneath duty and responsibility, just as I did. Don't make my mistake. Don't wake up one day to realize you've built an empire, but have no one to share it with. By now you've met James. I know this revelation must feel like the ultimate betrayal, but please understand. Keeping him separate from you and your siblings was about my shame, not about any lack of love for any of my children. I couldn't bear to admit my failures as a husband to your mother, or as a father to James. I'm entrusting you with the most important task, Emily. You've always been the glue that holds the family together, even when Michael and I were at our worst. Now I need you to make room in that family for James and his son. Not for my sake. It's far too late for that. But for yours. For all of you. Family is all that remains when the business empires crumble and the accolades fade away. All my love, Dad." Emily set down the letter, tears streaming down her face. It was so like her father, direct, unapologetic, and charged with expectations even from beyond the grave. She reached for her phone to call Sarah, but it rang before she could dial. It was Michael. "Have you opened yours?" he asked without preamble, his voice tight. "Just now," Emily replied. "You?" "Yeah." There was a long pause. "He apologized to me." "Dad actually apologized. Said he was wrong about my music, about the choices I made." Michael's voice cracked. "All I ever wanted was for him to say that when he was alive." Emily closed her eyes. "What else did he say?" "That I need to let go of my anger. That I was more like him than either of us wanted to admit." Michael gave a hollow laugh. "And he asked me to give James a chance. Said we might actually have a lot in common. Are you going to?" "I don't know." There was the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "What about you? What did your letter say?" Emily summarized it, omitting the personal details about her emotional walls. Some things were still too raw to share, even with her brother. "He wants me to be the peacemaker," she concluded. "To bring James into the fold." "Of course he does. Passing the responsibility to you, as usual." Michael sounded bitter again. "Have you talked to Sarah?" "Not yet. She texted that she'd opened hers. She's having dinner with James and his kid tonight," Michael said. "Did you know that?" Emily hadn't. "No, she didn't mention it. Found out from her Instagram. She posted a picture of them an hour ago. Looks like they're at that Italian place Dad used to take us to on birthdays." Emily felt a twist of something. Not quite jealousy, but exclusion. "I'm sure she was going to tell us." "Right." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Look, I need to go. Band practice. Just be careful with this James guy, okay?" We don't really know him. After hanging up, Emily stared at her father's letter again. Then, curiosity getting the better of her, she opened Instagram to find the photo Michael had mentioned. There was Sarah, smiling brightly between James and a small boy who was missing his 2 front teeth. They were at Vincenzo's, and the caption read, "Family dinner with my newly found brother and nephew. #blessed, #new beginnings." The comments were a mix of confusion and congratulations, with Sarah responding vaguely about family revelations. Emily felt a surge of anger. This wasn't how the public was supposed to find out. They hadn't even discussed how or when to acknowledge James publicly. She called Sarah, who answered on the 4th ring, the sound of restaurant chatter in the background. "Hey, did you read Dad's letter?" "I did, and I just saw your Instagram post." A pause. "Oh, are you upset?" "Sarah, we agreed to take things slow, to figure this out together. Now you've announced to the world that we have a secret brother without even discussing it with me or Michael." "I didn't announce anything," Sarah protested. "It's just a family dinner photo, with a caption that raises 1,000 questions. People are already asking in the comments. What am I supposed to tell colleagues when they ask why they've never heard about this brother before?" "The truth? Dad had a son before he married Mom, and we just found out about him. It's not that complicated." "It's exactly that complicated," Emily snapped. "This affects all of us, our personal lives, potentially the business, our standing in the community. Dad kept this secret for a reason." "Yeah, because he was ashamed," Sarah shot back. "But I'm not ashamed of James or Tommy. They're family. They're strangers who share DNA with us. Family is more than biology, Sarah. Maybe you should tell that to Dad, who is so obsessed with the Northwood legacy that he couldn't acknowledge his own son publicly." Emily took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Look, I'm not saying James and Tommy can't be part of our lives. I'm just saying we needed to approach this thoughtfully, as a united front." "Well, I'm sorry my happiness doesn't fit into your strategic plan," Sarah said coldly. "I have to go. We're about to have dessert." The line went dead, leaving Emily stunned. Sarah rarely pushed back like that. The usually peacekeeping sister had chosen a side, and it wasn't with her siblings. The next morning, Emily arrived at the family home to find Michael already there, pacing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "Did you see the Herald?" he asked without greeting, sliding the local newspaper across the counter. There, on the society page, was a small article, "Northwood Family Secret Revealed. Late business titan Richard Northwood's previously unknown son joins family." Emily scanned the article, which quoted family sources and mentioned James by name, including his profession and the existence of his son. There was even a mention of Diane Carroll, described as a former nurse who had a brief but significant relationship with Richard. "This is unbelievable," Emily muttered. "How did they get this information?" "3 guesses," Michael said grimly. "And the first 2 don't count." "Sarah wouldn't she? She's always been desperate for attention, for drama. This gives her both, plus the moral high ground of welcoming our long-lost brother." Emily wanted to defend their sister, but the timing was suspicious. "We need to get ahead of this. I'll call Jenkins, have him prepare a statement." "A statement?" Michael laughed. "This isn't a PR problem, Em. This is our lives being turned inside out. All the more reason to control the narrative," Emily insisted, already pulling out her phone. "God, you sound just like Dad." Michael shook his head, always worried about appearances, about the precious Northwood name. Before Emily could respond, the doorbell rang. They exchanged a look before Michael went to answer it. Moments later, he returned with James in tow. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," James said, looking uncomfortable. "But I thought you should know, my apartment was swarmed with reporters this morning. Someone leaked the story to the press." "We know," Emily said, gesturing to the newspaper. James looked genuinely distressed. "I swear it wasn't me. I would never." "It was Sarah," Michael cut in. "She's been playing happy families with you on social media, in case you hadn't noticed." James sighed. "I did notice, and I asked her to take it down. She said it wasn't a big deal, that people would find out eventually anyway." Emily studied him. "You asked her to remove it?" "Of course. I don't want this kind of attention. I'm a middle school teacher, for God's sake. My students' parents are calling the principal asking questions. Tommy's getting teased at school." James ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I never wanted to disrupt your lives. If it's easier, I can walk away from the inheritance, make a statement that I want no part of the Northwood estate." The offer surprised both Emily and Michael. "You do that?" Michael asked skeptically. "I've lived my whole life without the Northwood money. I can keep doing it." James looked between them. "I wanted to know my father, and I wanted Tommy to know his grandfather. That happened. The money was never the point." Something about his sincerity struck Emily. It aligned with what her father had written. That family was what mattered in the end, not the empire or the legacy. "No," she said finally. "Dad wanted you to have your share. We're not going to go against his wishes." Michael looked at her in surprise. "Since when?" "Since I read his letter." Emily turned to James. "But we do need to handle this situation carefully. For all our sakes." James nodded. "Whatever you think is best. I'll follow your lead." The three of them sat at the kitchen table, awkwardly at first, then with growing ease as they discussed how to address the public revelation of their connection. Michael remained guarded, but less hostile than before. As they talked, Emily found herself studying James's mannerisms, the way he tapped his fingers when thinking, just like their father used to do, and how he leaned forward when making an important point. There were echoes of Richard in him, but also a gentleness that Richard had never possessed. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah, who entered the kitchen looking defiant. "So you're all talking about me behind my back," she said, crossing her arms. "We're discussing the newspaper article that mysteriously appeared after your social media post." Emily replied evenly. Sarah had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "I didn't talk to any reporters, but I did tell Aunt Meredith, and you know, she can't keep a secret to save her life." "Unbelievable," Michael muttered. "I wanted our family to accept James and Tommy," Sarah insisted. "To stop treating them like some dirty secret." "That wasn't your decision to make," Emily said. "Wasn't it? Because none of you were making any decisions at all. You were just processing and considering and analyzing, while actual people with actual feelings were waiting in limbo." The room fell silent as her words sank in. There was truth in what she said, however impulsively she had acted. James cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, I appreciate the sentiment, Sarah. But Emily's right. This affects all of you, not just me." The tension in the room remained high as they stared at each other, the newly reconfigured Northwood family still trying to find its balance. The foundation had been fractured by Richard's secrets and their different reactions to them. Whether they could build something new on those fractures would depend on what they chose to do next. The Northwood siblings gathered in Jenkins' office the following week to formalize their response to the public revelation. The law firm's conference room felt sterile and cold, fitting for the tense atmosphere among them. Emily had prepared a statement acknowledging James as Richard's son and requesting privacy during this time of adjustment. Michael had reluctantly agreed to it, though his body language, arms crossed, jaw set, spoke volumes about his lingering resentment. "Once we issue this," Jenkins explained, sliding printed copies across the polished table, "I suggest maintaining a united front in public, regardless of your private feelings." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Heaven forbid the precious Northwood image be tarnished." "This isn't just about image," Emily countered. "It's about protecting all of us, including James and Tommy, from becoming tabloid fodder." "I didn't ask to be protected," Sarah muttered. Jenkins cleared his throat. "There's another matter we need to discuss. The board is meeting tomorrow to address concerns about the company leadership in light of recent developments." Michael straightened in his chair. "What concerns?" "Several board members have expressed uncertainty about the future direction of Northwood Group. They're suggesting that perhaps new leadership might be appropriate." "They can't force us out," Emily said sharply. "Dad's shares passed to us. We still hold controlling interest." "Collectively, yes," Jenkins agreed. "But the voting power is now divided 4 ways instead of 3, and none of you individually holds majority control." The implication hung in the air. If they weren't united, they could lose control of the company their father had built from nothing. "James doesn't want anything to do with the business," Sarah said. "He told me so." "Did he put that in writing?" Michael asked sarcastically. "He doesn't need to. I trust him." Michael laughed without humor. "You've known him for what, 2 weeks? And suddenly he's your most trusted confidant." "At least he's honest about who he is," Sarah shot back. "Which is more than I can say for some people in this room." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been meeting with Martin Reynolds." Sarah turned to Emily. "Did you know that? Mike's been having private lunches with Dad's biggest competitor." Emily's gaze snapped to Michael. "Is that true?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds reached out after the funeral. He wanted to express his condolences. "An offer to buy your shares, I bet," Sarah said. "He might have mentioned being interested if I ever wanted to sell." Michael glared at Sarah. "How do you even know about that?" "Hartford is a small city, Mike. People talk." Jenkins cleared his throat again. "Regardless of who's talking to whom, you need to present a unified front tomorrow. The board respects Emily as legal counsel, but they're concerned about the leadership vacuum Richard left behind." "We should bring James to the meeting," Sarah suggested. "Absolutely not," Emily and Michael said in unison. "Why not? He's legally entitled to be there now, and it would show the board we've accepted the situation and are moving forward as a family. Or it would look like we're parading him around to distract from the fact that we have no coherent plan for the company," Emily countered. The meeting ended with the statement approved, but little else resolved. As they left Jenkins' office, Emily pulled Michael aside in the hallway. "Are you really considering selling to Reynolds?" Michael ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Em. Maybe. I never wanted to be part of the business anyway. Dad knew that. So you'd throw away his legacy out of spite? Is that what you think this is about?" Michael's voice rose. "I spent my entire life trying to live up to impossible expectations. Now I finally have a chance to build something of my own. With Reynolds' money. Why not? He's offering well above market value." Emily stared at her brother, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time in years. The rebellious streak she'd always attributed to immaturity now looked more like self-preservation. "This isn't what Dad wanted." "Dad wanted a lot of things he didn't get," Michael replied quietly, "including a perfect son. Maybe that's why he kept James on the back burner all these years. A spare in case I was beyond redemption." Before Emily could respond, Sarah approached, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "I invited James to dinner at the house tonight," she announced. "I think we all need to clear the air before tomorrow." Michael looked like he wanted to object, but instead just shook his head and walked away. Emily watched him go, wondering when the gap between them had grown so wide. The family home felt different that evening, less like a mausoleum and more like the setting for an uncertain new chapter. Emily arrived first, changing from her work clothes into jeans and a sweater in her childhood bedroom, which remained largely untouched since her college days. Trophies from debate competitions lined the bookshelf, alongside legal texts she'd started collecting even as a teenager. She heard the front door open and voices downstairs, Sarah's light tones contrasting with the deeper rumble that must belong to James. Taking a deep breath, Emily descended to find them in the kitchen. Sarah was showing James how to use the complicated espresso machine their father had imported from Italy. "Emily," Sarah looked up with a smile that seemed forced. James brought dessert. Those little pastries from Morelli's that Dad loved. James held up a white bakery box. "I hope that's okay. Richard, your father, always brought them when he visited us." The comment landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the room. Emily managed a tight smile. "That's thoughtful, thank you." They worked in awkward tandem to prepare dinner, a simple pasta dish Sarah had chosen. The domesticity of the scene felt surreal to Emily, who kept finding herself startled by the similarities between James's mannerisms and their father's. The way he absent-mindedly rubbed his thumb against his fingers when thinking, the slight furrow in his brow when concentrating, all echoes of Richard. Michael arrived late, bringing the scent of cigarettes with him, a habit he'd supposedly quit years ago. His eyes narrowed at the sight of James comfortably helping in the kitchen, but he said nothing as he grabbed a beer from the refrigerator. Dinner was a stilted affair, with Sarah trying too hard to facilitate conversation, Emily monitoring her responses like a witness on the stand, and Michael alternating between sullen silence and barely concealed hostility. Only James seemed genuinely at ease, answering questions about his teaching career and his son with uncomplicated honesty. "Tommy's been asking to meet his aunts and uncle," James mentioned as they cleared the plates. "He's especially excited about having an uncle who's in a rock band." Michael looked up, surprised. "How does he know about that?" "Your father kept news clippings about your performances. I showed them to Tommy." James smiled. "He's learning guitar himself." Something shifted in Michael's expression, not quite acceptance, but perhaps a softening of his resistance. "How old is he again?" 8. Going on 30, some days. James laughed. "He's got strong opinions about everything from climate change to which cereal has the best mascot." "Sounds like Sarah at that age." Emily commented, earning a small smile from her sister. I've told him about all of you, James continued. Your father made sure he knew his family tree, even if the connection wasn't public. The mention of their father brought the tension back to the room. Michael drained his beer and set it down with more force than necessary. Let's cut the nice family dinner act, he said. We have a board meeting tomorrow that could determine the future of Northwood Group. What's your angle here, James? What do you want from the company? James looked taken aback. Nothing. I told Sarah, I have no interest in running a business. I'm a teacher, so you'll just sign over your voting rights to us? Michael pressed. I hadn't thought about it. James glanced at Emily. What would you recommend, legally speaking? Emily hesitated. It would depend on what you want to achieve. I want what's best for everyone, James said simply. Including Tommy's cousins, if you'll let him consider you that. The sincerity in his voice made Emily's chest tighten. Here was a man who had every right to be bitter, raised without a father's presence, kept secret like something shameful, yet he approached them with openness and generosity. Sarah reached across the table to squeeze James's hand. Of course he's family. Michael stood abruptly. I need some air. They watched him walk out to the back porch, where he lit another cigarette, his silhouette visible through the windows. He'll come around, Sarah said, though she didn't sound convinced. James shook his head. It's okay. I understand his position. If someone suddenly appeared claiming to be my brother, I'd be suspicious too. Emily studied him. You're very forgiving. Life's too short not to be, James replied. My mother taught me that. She could have been bitter about your father's choices, but she chose gratitude instead, for the support he provided, for the fact that he acknowledged me at all when many men wouldn't have. Emily thought of her father's letter, his admission of shame, his plea for her to make room in the family for James. Perhaps this was what he had seen in his oldest son that he had hoped his children would find as well, the capacity for forgiveness. Later, as James prepared to leave, Emily walked him to the door. Michael had not returned from the porch, and Sarah was cleaning up in the kitchen. About tomorrow, Emily said quietly. The board meeting. I won't ask you to sign over your rights, but I would appreciate it if you'd consider supporting our continued leadership of the company. It meant everything to our father. James nodded. I'll be there, and I'll support whatever preserves his legacy. As she watched him drive away, Emily felt the weight of her father's expectations, not just for the company, but for healing the family he had fractured. The question was whether the damage could be repaired, or if their divided loyalties would pull them further apart. The Northwood Group headquarters dominated the Hartford skyline, its glass and steel facade gleaming in the morning sun. Emily had always felt a surge of pride entering the building, knowing her father had built it from nothing. Today, that pride was tempered with anxiety as she rode the elevator to the top floor, where the boardroom awaited. Michael and Sarah had arrived separately. They now stood on opposite sides of the reception area, not speaking. James had texted that he was running late. His son had forgotten a school project, necessitating a detour. Ready? Emily asked her siblings, receiving a curt nod from Michael and a weak smile from Sarah. The boardroom was already filled with the 11 members who, along with Richard, had guided the company through decades of growth. Most were contemporaries of their father, men and women in their 60s and 70s who had known the Northwood children since they were small. Today, however, there were no warm smiles or familiar greetings, only calculated assessment. Thank you all for coming. Martin Greaves, the board chairman, began once they were seated. We find ourselves in an unprecedented situation with Richard's passing and the unexpected addition to the Northwood family. Emily kept her expression neutral, though she felt a flare of irritation at Greaves's tone. If I may, Martin, we've prepared a statement addressing that matter, which Jenkins will be releasing this afternoon. A statement won't resolve the leadership vacuum. Evelyn Porter, the senior-most board member after Greaves, interjected. Richard was the heart and soul of this company. With him gone, we need clear direction, which is why we're proposing a transition plan, Emily replied smoothly. As you know, I've been involved in all major legal decisions for the past 5 years. Michael has connections throughout the industry that could open new markets for us, and Sarah's work in education gives her unique insight into one of our fastest-growing divisions. With all due respect, Thomas Warrington, a newer board member, said, none of you has Richard's experience or vision. And now we learn there's a fourth heir we never knew existed. How can we be confident in the company's stability? The boardroom door opened, and James entered, slightly out of breath. I apologize for being late. All eyes turned to him. This stranger with Richard's jawline and bearing. Emily could practically feel the board members recalculating their positions. You must be James Carroll, Greaves said, rising to shake his hand. We were just discussing the company's future leadership. James took the empty seat beside Sarah. I understand your concerns, but I want to make my position clear. I have no intention of disrupting the company my father built. My focus is on teaching, not business. Noble sentiment, Porter said skeptically. But you now own 10% of Northwood Group. That comes with responsibilities. Which is why I've decided to align my voting rights with Emily's, James announced, causing Emily to turn to him in surprise. She has the legal expertise and the commitment to preserve what my father, our father, created. The simple statement shifted the energy in the room. Emily felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with confusion. They hadn't discussed this arrangement. Michael leaned forward. While we're making declarations, I should tell you all that I've decided to sell my shares. A murmur ran through the board members. Sarah gasped. Mike, you can't. To whom? Greaves demanded. That's still being negotiated. Michael's eyes slid to Reynolds' empty board seat. But I wanted to be transparent with this board. This is exactly the instability we feared, Warrington said. If the family can't maintain a united front, perhaps we should consider outside leadership. Emily's mind raced. With James's support, she would control 40% of the voting shares. If Michael sold his 30% to Reynolds, she would need Sarah's support to maintain family control. But Sarah had been increasingly unpredictable lately. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, she said carefully. Michael is entitled to explore his options, but no sale has been finalized. In the meantime, day-to-day operations continue smoothly under the current management team. The meeting continued for another hour, with Emily fighting to project confidence while inwardly calculating how to prevent the company from slipping away. When they finally adjourned, she cornered James in the hallway. Thank you for your support in there, but why didn't you tell me that was your plan? He looked apologetic. I made the decision this morning. After dinner last night, I realized that you're the one who cares most about preserving what Dad built. It seemed like the right choice. Emily studied him, still uncertain whether to trust this apparent generosity. And you don't want anything in return? I want what I've always wanted, to be acknowledged as Richard's son, to give Tommy a connection to his family history. James held her gaze. Not everything is a transaction, Emily. Before she could respond, Sarah joined them, her expression stormy. Can you believe Michael? How could he ambush us like that? Let's not discuss this here, Emily murmured, conscious of curious glances from employees passing in the hallway. Come back to the house. We need to talk privately. Back at the family home, Emily poured 3 glasses of scotch, ignoring the fact that it was barely noon. Sarah paced the study, while James examined the family photos arranged on the bookshelf, photos he had never been included in. We need to stop Michael from selling, Sarah insisted. It would kill Dad to know his company went to Reynolds. Dad's already dead, came Michael's voice from the doorway. None of them had heard him arrive. And he didn't leave the company to me. He left me shares. What I do with them is my choice. It's not just about you, Emily said. It's about all of us. About the 500 people who work for Northwood Group. About Dad's legacy. Dad's legacy, Michael repeated bitterly. That's all anyone cares about. Not what he did to us, to Mom. Not the lies he told for decades. James set down his untouched scotch. Maybe I should go? This seems like a family matter. You are family, Sarah insisted. That's the whole point. No, the whole point is that Dad decided who was family and who wasn't based on what was convenient for him, Michael snapped. He kept James hidden when it suited him, then tried to shoehorn him into our lives when he felt guilty. James flinched but didn't argue. Emily moved to her father's desk, a massive oak piece that dominated the room. We can debate Dad's choices later. Right now, we need to focus on preventing Reynolds from gaining control. Maybe it's for the best, Michael suggested. Reynolds knows the industry. He'd keep most of the staff. You don't know that, Sarah protested. Actually, I do. Michael pulled a document from his jacket pocket. It's in the offer. No layoffs for at least 5 years, retention bonuses for key personnel, and the Northwood name stays on the building. Emily's legal mind immediately spotted the loophole. For at least 5 years. After that, All bets are off. As they argued, James drifted to the wall of bookshelves behind the desk. He trailed his fingers along the spines, pausing at a row of leather-bound volumes. Are these photo albums? Sarah nodded. Dad was obsessive about documenting everything. There's an album for every year going back to when he started the company. James carefully extracted one dated 35 years earlier. He opened it, turning pages slowly, then stopped, his expression changing. Emily, Sarah, you might want to see this. They gathered around as James pointed to a photograph. It showed a much younger Richard at what appeared to be a company Christmas party. He had his arm around a pretty, dark-haired woman who was looking up at him adoringly. The caption, in Richard's precise handwriting, read, Diane's first Northwood Christmas. That's my mother, James said quietly. Emily stared at the photo, then at the date on the album. This was 3 years before Mom and Dad got married. She quickly pulled out the albums for the following years. In each one, Diane appeared in multiple photos, company picnics, office celebrations, even a ski trip. The captions grew more affectionate. Diane and me at Hunter Mountain. My Diane at the summer retreat. I don't understand, Sarah said, looking between the albums and James. Dad told Jenkins they had a brief relationship while he was engaged to Mom. James looked equally confused. That's what Mom told me too, that they met when Dad was already committed to someone else. Emily continued pulling albums, tracking Diane's presence, and then her absence. The final photo of her was dated just a month before Richard and Elizabeth's engagement was announced. The caption simply read, The End. Michael had been watching silently. Now he reached for the last album with Diane in it. She wasn't some nurse he had a fling with. She worked for him. She was part of his life. For years, Emily added, her mind reeling. Why would he lie about that? Because the truth was worse than we thought, Michael said grimly. He didn't have a momentary lapse in judgment. He chose to leave her, to leave both of them, for Mom. The implication hung heavy in the air. Their mother had always told them she and Richard had a fairy tale romance, love at first sight at a charity gala. But these photos suggested a much messier reality. James closed the album gently. I had no idea. My mother always spoke of their relationship as something beautiful but brief. She never indicated they were together for years. Maybe she was protecting you, Sarah suggested. Or herself. Or maybe Dad convinced her to maintain his version of events, Michael said. He was good at rewriting history when it suited him. Emily moved back to the desk, her thoughts churning. She pulled open the center drawer, where she knew her father kept his personal papers. Inside was an old leather journal she had never seen before. Opening it revealed Richard's handwriting, page after page of entries spanning several years. It's his diary, she said, scanning the entries. From around the time he met Diane. The siblings gathered around as Emily read selected passages aloud. The early entries were full of optimism, Richard's growing business, his deepening relationship with Diane, whom he described as the most supportive partner a man could ask for. There were mentions of their plans for the future, including marriage. Then the tone shifted. Richard wrote about meeting Elizabeth Bradford at a business function, about her family's connections and wealth, about the doors a union with her would open. The internal struggle was painfully evident. His love for Diane versus the advantages Elizabeth brought. I can build an empire with Elizabeth, Emily read, her voice tight. With Diane, I would have to build it alone. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. He chose Mom because of her family's connections? He chose the path of least resistance, Michael said flatly. The one that would get him what he wanted fastest. James stood very still, his face unreadable. When did he find out about me? Emily flipped through more pages until she found the entry. Diane came to the office today. She's pregnant. Everything I've set in motion with Elizabeth will be derailed if this gets out. She looked up at James, her heart aching for him. He knew from the beginning. The next entries detailed Richard's frantic attempts to manage the situation, setting up the trust fund, arranging for Diane to move to Springfield, convincing her to keep their relationship and James's paternity quiet. Elizabeth must never know, Emily read. The Bradfords would withdraw their support entirely if this scandal emerged. Everything I've worked for would collapse. None of them spoke for a long moment. The truth of their father's choices, cold, calculated decisions that had shaped all their lives, lay exposed in black and white. All these years, Michael finally said, I thought Dad was disappointed in me because I wasn't good enough. But it was never about that. He was disappointed in himself, and I reminded him of it. That doesn't excuse how he treated you, Emily said quietly. No, Michael agreed. But it explains a lot. James closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was a new resolve in his expression. My mother protected me from this truth my entire life. She never let me feel like I was less than or unwanted. She let me believe my father had legitimate reasons for staying away. She loved you, Sarah said simply. Yes, more than enough to make up for his absence. James looked at the Northwood siblings. I don't know what happens next, but I want you all to know something. I didn't come here for money or status or revenge. I came because, before she died, my mother made me promise to give Richard a chance to be my father, and to give his other children a chance to be my family. The raw honesty of his statement hung in the air between them, challenging the lifetime of half-truths and manipulations they had just uncovered. What do we do now? Sarah asked, looking between her siblings and the man who was, undeniably, their brother. Emily glanced at the journal, at the photograph of Diane, at James's face, so like their father's, but gentler, more open. We start by telling the truth. To ourselves, at least. Whatever happens with the company, we need to be honest about who we are and where we came from. Michael nodded slowly. No more Northwood secrets. The discovery of Richard's journal changed everything. For days, the Northwood siblings took turns reading it, each finding passages that spoke to their own relationship with their father. Emily was struck by Richard's early descriptions of her, his pride in her academic achievements coupled with concern that she was too much like him, too driven by ambition at the expense of connection. Michael found bitter validation in entries showing Richard's awareness of his harmful criticisms, but his inability to stop himself from making them. Sarah discovered that her father had recognized her peacemaking efforts but had relied on them too heavily, burdening her from a young age with the emotional stability of the family. And James learned that Richard had kept photos of him hidden in his office safe, had attended school plays and graduations from a distance, and had struggled with guilt and regret throughout his life. A week after the board meeting, they gathered again at the family home. The atmosphere was different, less combative, more somber. They had arranged the meeting to make decisions about the company, but the agenda felt secondary to the emotional reckoning they were all experiencing. Emily had prepared documents outlining various scenarios, from maintaining family control to accepting Reynolds' offer. James had brought Tommy to meet his aunts and uncle properly. The boy was currently exploring the large backyard, giving the adults space to talk. Before we get into business matters, Emily began, I think we need to address what we've learned about Dad and our family history. Sarah nodded. I've been thinking about Mom. Do you think she knew? About James, about Diane? There's nothing in the journal to suggest she did, Emily replied. But those entries stop after their wedding. We don't know what happened later. I can't believe she didn't suspect something, Michael said. Dad was meticulous about everything except covering his tracks. Those photo albums were right there on the shelf the whole time. James shifted uncomfortably. My mother never spoke ill of your mother. She always said Elizabeth was an innocent party. Maybe she was, Emily acknowledged. Or maybe she made the same calculation Dad did, that the marriage offered advantages worth overlooking certain complications. They sat with this possibility, each contemplating what it meant for their understanding of their parents' relationship. I found something else, Sarah said, pulling a small box from her bag. It was in Mom's jewelry case. I was looking for her pearl earrings to wear to a school function, and this was hidden in a false bottom. She opened the box to reveal a folded piece of paper that had yellowed with age. Carefully unfolding it, she read aloud. Richard, I know about Diane and the child. I've known since before our wedding. I chose to marry you anyway, believing we could build something meaningful together despite this. I only ask that you be present for our children in ways you cannot be for him. Elizabeth. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Their mother had known all along, had made her own choice to proceed with the marriage, extracting from Richard a promise to be fully present for the children they would have together. A promise he kept, for the most part, Michael said quietly. Until he didn't. Emily thought of her father's frequent business trips during their childhood, how he had never missed a school event or recital, how he had coached Michael's Little League team even while working 70-hour weeks. He had tried to honor Elizabeth's request, until the strain of his divided life had begun to show in his increasingly critical relationship with Michael, in his emotional distance from all of them as they entered adulthood. "What about you, James?" Sarah asked gently. "How does it feel to learn that both of them knew that your absence from our lives was deliberate?" James was quiet for a long moment. "I've had a week to process this. At first, I was angry, not just at Richard, but at my mother too. She protected me from the truth, let me believe a simpler story. But eventually, I realized she was trying to preserve my ability to love my father without complication." He smiled sadly. "Parents make impossible choices sometimes." "Speaking of which," Emily said, steering the conversation toward the business at hand, "we still need to decide about the company. Michael, are you still determined to sell your shares?" Michael looked out the window to where Tommy was climbing a tree in the yard. "I've been reconsidering. Not because of Dad or his legacy, but because of what I've learned about myself this past week." He turned back to his siblings. "I always thought I was running away from the business because I wasn't good enough. But maybe I was running because I didn't want to become him. Cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice relationships for success." "You're nothing like him," Sarah insisted. "Maybe not, but I could have been." Michael shrugged. "Anyway, I've asked Reynolds to give me more time. Told him I need to discuss it with my family." Emily felt a surge of hope. "So you're open to alternatives?" "Depends on what they are. I still don't want to be trapped in a corporate office for the rest of my life." James cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about this too. My share is smaller than yours, but I want to use it constructively." He looked at Emily. "What if we created a foundation? The Northwood Foundation, or whatever you want to call it. My shares and part of yours could fund educational initiatives, community development, the kinds of things your father cared about but never had time to pursue fully." The suggestion landed like a revelation. Emily immediately saw the potential, not just for the family's public image, but for healing. "It could be something totally separate from the company," James continued. "Michael, you could be involved as much or as little as you want. Sarah's experience and education would be invaluable, and Tommy and any children you all might have someday would see that the Northwood name stands for more than business success." Sarah was nodding enthusiastically. "I love this idea. We could focus on underserved schools in Hartford to start, maybe expand to Springfield where you and Tommy live." Even Michael looked intrigued. "It would need proper funding, not just the dividends from our shares." "What if," Emily suggested, warming to the concept, "instead of selling to Reynolds, you sold a portion of your shares to the foundation itself? You'd get some liquidity, and the foundation would have an ownership stake in the company, ensuring ongoing funding." The conversation flowed more easily than any they'd had since Richard's death. For the first time, they weren't positioning against each other, but building something together. Tommy came inside, cheeks flushed from playing, and curled up next to James as they continued discussing possibilities. As the day progressed, a framework emerged. Emily would remain connected to the company as legal counsel and would represent the family's interests on the board. Michael would sell 20% of his shares to the newly formed foundation, giving him capital to pursue his music while maintaining a connection to the family legacy. Sarah would take a leadership role in the foundation, working with James to develop its educational mission. And James would continue teaching but would serve on the foundation's board, creating a bridge between his life in Springfield and the Northwood family in Hartford. By evening, the initial legal documents were drafted. As Emily printed them from Richard's study computer, she felt a sense of accomplishment unlike any courtroom victory. This wasn't just a business solution, it was a family one. They ordered pizza, Tommy's choice, and ate in the kitchen, the formality of the dining room abandoned for a more intimate setting. Michael even played some of his band's new songs for Tommy, who watched with undisguised admiration. Later, as James prepared to leave with a sleepy Tommy, he paused in the foyer. "I want to thank you all. When my mother asked me to reach out to Richard, I never imagined it would lead to this. I thought, at best, I might get to know my father a little before he was gone. I never expected to gain siblings." Sarah hugged him tightly. "We're going to make this work. All of us." Michael offered his hand, then surprised everyone by pulling James into a quick, awkward embrace. "Bring the kid for the weekend sometime. I've got an extra guitar he can use." Emily walked them to the car, helping Tommy with his seatbelt while James put their bags in the trunk. As she straightened up, James caught her eye. "He would be proud of you," he said quietly. "The way you've handled everything, kept everyone together. Emily felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. I'm not sure pride from Richard Northwood is the compliment it once was. Maybe not. But I'm proud to be your brother, if that counts for anything. It counted for more than she could express. Emily squeezed his arm gently, then stepped back as he got into the driver's seat. She watched them drive away, standing on the porch long after their taillights had disappeared down the street. Back inside, she found Michael and Sarah in the study, looking through more photo albums. Remember this? Sarah asked, pointing to a picture of the three of them at a lake house, maybe 10 years old. Dad rented that place for a month one summer. It was the longest vacation he ever took. Because Mom insisted, Michael recalled. She threatened to leave him if he didn't spend more time with us. Emily sat between her siblings, studying the photo, their sun-browned faces, the water sparkling behind them, Richard's hand visible at the edge of the frame, reaching toward them. A complicated man, their father, capable of both calculated cruelty and moments of genuine love. What happens now? Sarah asked softly. Emily thought about the foundation documents waiting for signatures, about James and Tommy returning to Springfield but planning to visit soon, about the board meeting scheduled for next week where they would present their unified plan. She thought about the journal with its painful truths and about their mother's note revealing her own complicity in the family's fractured structure. We move forward, she said simply, not by forgetting or excusing what happened, but by choosing to build something better. Michael nodded, turning the page to reveal more family photos, moments that were real despite the secrets that had surrounded them. I can drink to that. So they did, pouring 3 glasses of their father's best scotch, raising them in a toast not to Richard Northwood's memory, but to the family they were choosing to become, complicated, imperfect, but finally honest with each other. Outside, a spring rain began to fall, washing away the last traces of winter from the garden where generations of Northwoods had walked. Inside, 3 siblings who had been drifting apart found their way back to each other, strengthened rather than divided by the truth they had uncovered and the brother they had found. The foundation of their family had indeed been fractured, but upon those fissures, they were building something new, something that could bear the weight of both their history and their future.